Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. That's RJ Schaefer. I'm Jackson Caldwell, coming to you shortly after Georgia Tech battled all the way to the end against number one Duke, but come up short 78-70. Their season is effectively over. I think there might be a small chance they go to the NIT. I'm not well versed in that, so I'm not going to sit here and project it for you. But yeah, it was a we're gonna get into it, but it was a tough game. Got a lot of thoughts on it. But RJ, how you doing, man?
As good as I can be, for the circumstances. It was, definitely a hard fought game. A lot of opportunities throughout the game, but it ended how it ended.
Yeah, so I guess let's just get into it. So obviously we knew Georgia Tech was a heavy underdog today. It was like we said yesterday, they were about a 22 and a half point underdog coming into the game. We talked about what needed to happen. Not turning the ball over, shooting well from three while also limiting Duke's shooting as well. We knew they probably weren't going to dominate the paint like they did yesterday against Virginia. Duke is just a bigger team. Um, you couldn't have pictured a better start. Georgia Tech, they it was a little bit back and forth through the first 5 or 6 minutes. Duke could not hit water if they fell out of a boat when they started this game. Georgia Tech goes up 16-8. Duncan Powell's playing really well, and then the lead's 23-12. Then it's 26-12, and I'll be honest, I was really starting to, I try not to get too ahead of myself in games, because anything can happen. But even right then, I was like, man, we talked about Duke coming out flat, and not saying like Duke didn't care about the game, but it's like they just can't, they haven't played in a little bit. Georgia Tech had played yesterday. They met, maybe a little bit more used to it out there, at least to start out. And I was like, it's starting to feel like it really might happen because, there wasn't much left in the first half. And then the game just turned on its head pretty much past that point, which is a strange thing to say. So Duke starts to get on a little bit of a run. And then the big news story of the day was Cooper Flagg injuring his ankle, left the game, did not come back, was ruled out after halftime. I believe John Shire said in the postgame that the x-rays come back negative. He wasn't wearing a boot or anything. He was still hobbling a little bit on the bench there. But first and foremost, I was glad he was all right. Again, first and foremost, but him not being able to come back in, you did start to wonder, man, did this just get a lot more real? Could they really pull the upset? And again, things just went downhill. So they took a 31-26 lead into the half. After they went up 26-12, they were outscored 14-5 to end the half. And that you could start to feel a little bit of uneasiness, but it was like, okay, you got a chance to kind of reset a little bit. Halftime kind of stopped Duke's run. Kind of, I guess, what were your thoughts on the first half and kind of, the early run by Georgia Tech? And then when things, I point to the last 3 minutes of the first half is when you had a little bit of a vibe shift.
Yeah, that's about what I'd say too. And honestly, early in the game, Georgia Tech, they were still playing good. They were still dominating, especially early, even when Flagg was still in the game. I want people to realize it wasn't Flagg went down. Then Georgia Tech went on a run. Georgia Tech was already up by a decent amount. Obviously, Malik Brown going down too was really unfortunate for Duke. Probably their number one and number two defensive guys on the team went down. But I thought, they had kind of lucked into Duke shooting 0 for 14 from three. And then I do think they could have capitalized on that run a little bit more because there were a lot of empty possessions, a lot of missed shots. But being up by 14 on Duke, you can't do that by accident. But let it go a little bit into the first half, and then, that's where Duke just kind of pounced.
Yeah, and you look at some of the first half numbers here. Bai was really good, had 11 points. Duncan Powell had 9. I'll get into this more. And again, when we talk about player struggles, it's not like singling them out and saying this is the reason they lost. I don't want to dog anybody. You didn't we talked about Lance Terry kind of having an off game and how he was going to have to be a bigger part of today. And we'll get to the second half in just a second. But only had 2 points in the first half. Nate George, he was solid in the first half, had 5 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Struggled a lot in the second half, which we'll get into. You did get kind of a surprise three from Darian Sutton there in the late in the first half, but the big story was Duke was 2 of 16 from three, and like they are one of the best. They're the best 3-point shooting team in the ACC, one of the best in the country. When they really get going, as you saw in the second half, which they weren't amazing from three in the second half, but you saw a better version of them in that half. Like they're really tough to stop, but man, it Georgia Tech led by 5. They were shooting the ball fairly well because, again, as well as their offense, like Duke is incredibly good on the defensive end. I think when I last looked, they had the number 1 or number 2 defense according to Ken Palm. I think Houston's first, but Duke is right there at it. Like they're a really tough team to score on, which is one of the things that worried me in this game. Because Georgia Tech can go through these stretches where they just can't hit a bucket. And when we go over to the second half, that's what it was. At least to start. Like I know the overall shooting numbers don't look bad for the second half right here. Like they shot 44% from the field, 7 of 14 on three. Like they shot better than Duke from three in the second half still. But a lot of that offense was a little bit too late. They started the second half really poor. Duke started on a 12-0 run, got up 38-31. And that kind of, I won't say it sealed the game, but it really, Georgia Tech just couldn't get a lot closer than that. You had a couple of buckets where they would get to 5 or 6, and it was like, okay, can you get a stop on the defensive end? But that to me was really the story there during the second half stretch where, Georgia Tech was not totally out of the game, but they just couldn't get any stops. And like, huge shout out to Conka Nipple. Like he was incredible today. We talked about him on the pod, is just like he is a projected lottery pick, possible top 10 pick in this year's NBA draft. Incredible shooter. I mean, he had 22 points in the second half. I mean, he finished with 28, which I believe was a new career high. I thought I heard them say on the broadcast. Him and Malawak, who is, again, a projected lottery pick and a top 10 pick. Those two scored 34 points, 34 of Duke's 52 points in the second half. Isaiah Evans had 8, like that. But it was Knipple and Malawak, and Georgia Tech just couldn't get a stop, and they were getting beat up on the boards too. And as good of a team, of a rebounding team as Georgia Tech is, and we saw them dominate the paint yesterday. I mean, the second half rebounding numbers. I mean, Duke out rebounded them 22-11. Second chance points. They didn't actually lead to a lot. But 22 points in the paint for Duke, which, Georgia Tech, again, only 14 points in the paint in the second half. I believe they finished with 26, which is 18 points less than they did yesterday. And that's about where I kind of thought it would be. I talked yesterday about like Georgia Tech was going to have to hit some shots from three to have a chance in this game. And honestly, I thought they played well enough on offense for the majority of the game. Again, the beginning of the second half was pretty brutal. I don't think they scored for the first 5 or so minutes, and that's Duke just kind of seized control of the game. Kind of just, what were your thoughts on that second half? Because I've got some other things I want to say, but I'll let you take the first stab at it.
Yeah, the big difference to me from the first half and the second half was Duke's stars shined. Like in the first half, there wasn't really a dominant scorer. Nobody had more than 6 points, and I felt like Georgia Tech did a pretty good job of defending everybody, even if they were kind of lost sometimes. In the second half, that was just accentuated. Mollywock is probably one of the most dominant players in all of college basketball. He's going to be a lottery pick, and he was amazing in the second half. Just defensively, offensively, dominated the boards. I think he had 5 or 6 boards in the second half. That is where I saw the biggest difference. Him and Knuppel, just took the game over. And it's hard to outpace them because, getting back to the second half of the second half, I thought Georgia Tech was shooting fine. Like they were at a very good offensive pace. They were scoring on almost every possession. It's just hard to stop Duke. Like they have so many shooters everywhere. They have guys that can score the ball. And, it's just hard to play defense when you got a 6-man rotation.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. Again, the defense just there was just a stretch there where they just couldn't get anything going. I feel like the game was won the last 3 minutes of the first half and probably the first 5 or 6 minutes of the second half, because then it was a pretty tight back and forth. And look, I will give Georgia Tech some credit here. I think Duke got up, was it maybe 11 or 12? I don't.
11.
Yeah, they got up 11, and I was worried things were going to start avalanching, and it was just going to get to, okay, Duke's going to win by 26 or 27 now, and it's just Georgia Tech just can't stay composed. I do think a little bit of credit should go to them for staying in it, because, like I said, they did battle the rest of the way, and they were hitting shots at the end. Like Duncan Powell was still hitting shots. Lance Terry hit a couple of big shots in the second half. Um, but like, yeah, Lance Terry scoring 10 points in the second half. Duncan Powell 15. Bai was held mostly in check. They just couldn't get him going in the second half. Nate George 1 of 6 for 3 points. Did have 4 assists. Jaden Mustafa, again, hey, he's just got to grow his offensive game. Like, that's going to be one of the keys going into next season. He's just got to take a bit of a leap, because it's just he just wasn't able to do much. I think the potential's there, but I think that's going to be something to watch going forward. But at the end of the day, Duke with an 8-point win, and we'll kind of, I guess, get out of here on this, because like I do think it's worth asking. Coming into the day, everybody wants to win. Every fans of their team just they want to see them win, and this would have been the biggest upset of the year, with or without Cooper Flag. And, if we'd have told you at the beginning of the day, an hour before tip off, like, hey, Georgia Tech's going to lead for a lot of the game, they're going to battle all the way to the end, lose by 8, I think most people would have taken it. With now knowing that Cooper Flag was out for the entire second half, last 3 or 4 minutes of the first half, is there a little bit more of a disappointment that you couldn't capitalize on that and win the game?
To me, no. Like, even without Cooper Flag, I still think Duke is probably a top 5 team in the country, maybe even top 3 team in the country. People got to realize this Duke roster is so deep. Like we talked about before, there are probably 5 or 6 guys that, are going to be draft eligible and teams are looking at heading into the year. But to be able to say that, you battled as hard as you did, and I want to give credit to these kids where credit is due, because they were gassed this game. I mean, you saw it in the second half. These guys were playing 40 minutes last night, 40 minutes tonight. Like even Lance Terry, Nate George, all of those guys, maybe it didn't show up in the stat sheet, but they really gave it their all. And I think it's, a credit to Stoudemire, because you had most of the year where you only had 6 or 7 scholarship players, and the guys that you do have battled, and I thought everybody gave it their all on the court. It's just, it sucks given the circumstances. It sucks given you were up 14 against the number 1 team in the country and you couldn't close out. But I think they did, catch Duke off guard, and hats off to them.
Yeah. So I pretty much fall on the same line. I won't be mad if somebody says that they're pretty disappointed that they couldn't, take advantage of Cooper Flag being out for the rest of the game. But Duke is a lot more than Cooper Flag. I know he gets a ton of attention. For anybody that has watched a lot of Duke games or a lot of college basketball just in general, Duke is just so deep. Like, they recruit well, they develop really well. They had some guys stay from last year. Like, it's not like they're playing just all freshmen or anything. It's they just have a lot of guys that are tough to deal with. And you saw it in the second half with what Knipple did and what Malawak did. It was just that those guys have that gear that, quite frankly, nobody on Georgia Tech really has. And that's not a shot at anybody on Georgia Tech. It's just Duke has a lot of really good players and a lot of guys that are going to play in the NBA, possibly for a long time. So I do think there is a little bit of disappointment. I think just playing so well to start the game, being up 14, and I don't think anybody, even at that point, thought, oh man, Georgia Tech's going to blow Duke out. I think most people expected it to stay close, but just to kind of seize the lead like you did and never get it back, I do think stings just a little bit.
Yeah, and especially end of the first half, start of the second half, you'd have started to see Duke grind it away. Um, and it's just hard. Duke played, I think, 9 guys tonight, and Georgia Tech was just gassed. I think, that is an example of why having that double bye is so important, because even though Duke was a little rusty in the, front end of the game, the fatigue of playing the night before is definitely going to show out. and their bench is just so deep. I mean, Knuppel had a absolute career night. The numbers are a little inflated because he took all of the free throws in the
Yeah,
back half of the game, but
but
he deserved it. He's a 91% free throw shooter. He was going to be the guy anyway.
yeah, Duke deserves a lot of credit. I think you should tip cap to Georgia Tech for fighting hard. We talked about it on Sunday in our preview pod. Like, we thought a successful ACC tournament, um, getting a win over Virginia, playing Duke tough. They did that. I think all things considered with the injuries and stuff, I still, even with the Cooper Flag injury and not being able to capitalize on it, I think they fought hard. And uh, now it's on to year 3. It'll be here before you know it. I know we'll have, plenty of time to kind of reflect and talk about it. Good recruiting class coming in. The transfer portal is going to be open, so that it's just the madness never ends as far as that goes. But any other thoughts on today before we get out of here?
I got nothing.
All right. Well, I didn't say it at the beginning, but I got to say it at the end. If you're watching this on YouTube, not subscribed, would really love it if you would subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you know when our new content goes live. Love all the support you guys have shown us. We're on to – it's almost like, now that we still got the women's basketball tournament, but we're almost time to turn a new leaf, heading towards the summer and, all sports kind of reset. We got baseball, we got women's basketball, and there will be plenty of coverage of all that stuff right here. But appreciate all the support. If you're listening on podcasts, leave a review. Let us know what you think of the show in the comments. We always like hearing what you guys think could improve the show. So appreciate all that. And we will see you next time. Thank you for listening.